In an era of working from home, people dropping dead on the streets, and daily White House press conferences, what are we supposed to do with ourselves? This is coronavirus. Welcome to Collective Conscious, a podcast where my friend Junwei and I casually talk about topics in politics, psychology, philosophy, as they relate to the shared human experience. This is our 10th episode, and today we are talking about coronavirus. Nothing too specific in particular, but generally speaking, how it affects us, what to think about it, what we should do about it, things of that nature. So I'll just kick it right to you, Junwei. What are your first thoughts about this?
Well, one word I would like to just kind of summarize everything that's going on is just like unprecedented pretty much. And considering like how young we are, Tyler, like we're just in our early 20s, and for this to be happening in our lives, like on one hand is actually like, besides all the horrible things that are going on, it's actually like in a different perspective, it's kind of like morbidly like kind of cool if you just ignore like the bad parts of it. Just the fact that like in 20 years, in 100 years, in like 1,000 years, I would say like this is like history textbook material, like grade A, like people will remember this. And the craziest part is just like how do you like we're actually just living through it. I mean, everyone is living through it, obviously, but it's just like how do you even like begin to it's kind of hard to internalize this in a real way just because it's happening live and like all you can do is sort of react to it, and it's I find it hard for myself to even like to know what's going on truly, if that makes sense. And it just everything is just happening really fast, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, something I've been saying to people when I'm talking about it, especially, talking to people at work, everyone's working from home, so everybody loves to talk about that transition to working from home. But one of the things I've been saying is that this is actually kind of cool because this might be the only time in our lives where we are truly living through something monumentally historical. Like this is something that if it continues down the path it's on right now, today being March 26, 2020, this could be something that's talked about for, centuries into the future. And that's pretty interesting. I'm not sure we'll get fully another opportunity to live through something like that.
Yeah, and I think like one of the coolest things is I don't know about cool, but like when I imagine myself like I don't know 30, 25 years down the line, and I have like maybe I have kids, maybe I have potentially grandkids, and they're gonna ask like, "Hey, Junwei, what was that like Corona thing like in 2019, 20? Like, what was that all about?" And like, it's one of those moments where you just think like, I get to you get if when you look back on it in like 35 years, assuming we're still here, hopefully,
Yeah.
that you get to like this shared experience, and it's just like one of those things everyone can will be relate to, and when that time comes.
Yeah. I wonder if it's going to be one of those things like, how people, when they talk about 9/11 or something, people say like they always remember where they were when they found out about it. I wonder if this is going to be something kind of similar, even though it's not like one event. People will always remember like what they did when coronavirus outbreak happened.
Yeah, and the thing about that is like 9/11 was like a thing where, people were like out and about, right? They were like in school, they were at work, they were in public places. And I think this coronavirus thing, like, the question like where were you? Like unless you were like, part of like, healthcare system, or like you work in healthcare, or you're a nurse or a doctor, like most people like were just the answer is gonna be I was at home, man.
Yeah. I wonder how you know there's a pretty big difference between introverts and extroverts in how they're reacting to something like this. And I think it's only been a couple weeks at this point of people really having to work from home and self isolate, self quarantine. For the introverts like myself, it hasn't been that difficult because quite frankly, my life just hasn't changed that much yet. But you're an extrovert, so I'm curious what your point of view of essentially being trapped inside and not being able to talk to people has been like. How do you feel like that's affected you so far and going forward?
It's definitely has been. First of all, I wouldn't really classify myself as a true extrovert, but as a person who like craves social connection and talking to other people, it definitely has been hard on me in that regard. And you know, it's hard to cope sometimes with just being alone in your house. And obviously, I'm really thankful that I have a family who supports me, and I'm living under a roof, so I have that going for me. But the social aspect is like not being able to like go outside and most of my hobbies and interests involve going outside, and that's I think a lot of people like me just are kind of bummed, and also like you know NBA and sports and March Madness, like everyone can relate to not being able to enjoy those experiences anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Even for the hobbies that don't necessarily involve you going outside, some of those have been taken away too, just with sports going off the air, you know. Well, I guess concerts kind of count as going outside, but concerts aren't going on. Even things that you might do in your living room normally are still being taken away, which is kind of
Right.
strange.
And
I've never seen the world so paused.
that's a great way to put it. It's just like we're on pause because, as I said, this is happening in real time, and it's just hard to comprehend what's happening. But I wanted to talk about one of the things I've noticed is like there's a Reddit sub called Stoicism, and that sub has not been more popular than right now because in
Yeah,
my
not
in my
surprising.
personal opinion, like this is probably the best time to like adopt that philosophy, just because this is pretty much everything that philosophy like preaches, and like if you're a Stoic person, this is pretty much like the time like when it like what's like the if you're a Stoic person, like what's like the real test, and this is like your test if you're a Stoic person. So this is like that's just something I noticed on Reddit.
Yeah, one of my friends is really into Stoicism, so I wonder how he's been doing. Um, Maybe I'll reach out to him after this recording. But yeah, I think this that's a good word for it is it's a test. I mean, it's a test of people's, you know, ability to put up with their families, also ability to put up with themselves. Um, I think this is probably an opportunity for a lot of people, myself included, to learn how to be more self-sufficient in a lot of ways. You know, learning how to truly find comfort in the absence of a lot of those external stimuli.
Yeah, I mean, I'll reference a quote I did back a couple episodes ago, but by Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. But when one is unable to change a situation, one is forced to change themselves. And as you just said, like you have to really in this kind of weird time, you have to kind of just rely on yourself and like kind of adopt that mindset of, there's nothing I can do to really control what's happening outside, but there's still a lot of things I can still control, right? Like what I learn, like what new things I can learn, right?
Yep, and that's been a big one for me personally is learning new things. Uh, right before we got on this call, actually, I was just reading a textbook, something that I've been wanting to do for a while, like a topic that I've been wanting to read about again for a while, just hadn't found the time. Well, now there aren't many excuses not to do things like that. So, in some sense, I feel like I've been pushed to do those things that I've been putting off for a while. So, there's sort of a silver lining in that sense, maybe.
I think we as humans, like we love to, and I think this is the only way we truly evolve as humans, but not just intellectually, but just like evolve in its strict sense, but just like the concept of adapting to like what your circumstances give you. So like during these times, like you're forced in a way to adapt to your surroundings, and as you said, like lean on yourself, and you have to just do everything yourself now, and also at the same time find the silver lining, because like one thing is, and I would like to ask you this, but like what is society like if there's no hope anymore? Like I think there's a small minority of the population in the world where just like they're really panic buying, or they're really really scared about this virus, and rightfully so. It's not, I'm kind of scared myself too, but it seems like most people are still holding on to like a sense of hope that everything will be better, um, you know, by next year or sometime. And I think having hope is really important to move forward.
Do you feel like your belief that things are going to get better again has been a hopeful belief? Because for me, I wouldn't necessarily use the word hope. I would just use the word almost assumption. Like and this isn't necessarily rational. That's not what I'm trying to claim. But just the way that I've been thinking about it is that, of course, things will get back to normal. It's just a matter of waiting till that happens. It actually reminds me quite a bit of a time when I was 16, when I was quite sick. Um, and it was a possibility that I wasn't going to make it, but that thought never really, at least to my memory, crossed my mind. My thought process was like, this is just something that I'm going to have to deal with for a little while and then it'll be over. And I think that's pretty much the same way that I've viewed this so far. And, like I said, that's not necessarily a rational way to view it. And I think it's also, I think it's a pretty adolescent way to view it too, because it ties into that feeling of invincibility, maybe. But I'm not sure I would say that I've been hopeful. I just don't feel like that's necessarily the right word for it.
So I guess your interpretation of what's going on is just like you have this assumption that like, it has to get back to normal. Like there's no other possibility. Like the only possibility is that it gets back to normal, and like maybe subconsciously you're kind of in denial of the fact that like what if things like actually don't go back to normal?
Pretty much. Maybe a better word than hope for me would be faith. I just have faith that things will be okay again.
Okay.
So I think a society can probably survive without hope, but I don't know if it can survive without faith.
What's the difference?
Well, I think hope is a sort of hope is a striving for something greater that's not yet been achieved. And I think faith is more like an underlying belief of, um, well, not of any one thing in particular, but just generally speaking, faith is an underlying belief in some universal state of being, state of affairs. And for me right now, that faith would be in the fact that things would go back to normal and things will be okay. But I wouldn't say I'm necessarily hoping for that. I just believe it.
Oh, I wonder if that I can see the difference in between those two words, but I wonder if, if you're in the minority and, your faith and I'm hope, and what the general population stance is right now. I don't know the
Yeah,
answer.
I do wonder. I do wonder. We talked about optimism and pessimism before, and I think that's probably something that is more relevant now than almost any other time. And people are faced with adversity. You have to choose what your outlook's going to be. And we talked about possibly the alternative to both of those being uh, agnosticism. Is that the noun form of being agnostic? I don't even know. It sounds right though.
Sounds right.
Anyway, yeah, I think now is truly a test of what people's genuine philosophy is. I mean, you had just mentioned people on people who consider themselves stoic. This is a great test for that. But even going beyond the philosophies that strictly apply to this, I think it's generally a test of what people actually believe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way because it's just the things I've seen, on the internet or in the world. But like one thing is like it really is a test because some people are faced with the reality that like their their loved ones like may be in danger, or they might pass away, or even yourself might be in danger. It might die actually. And so one thing I read on the Stoic sub on Reddit was that there was just like great like profound quote this guy posted. It got like 1,000 upvotes and made like the front page, and it was something about death. It was like the Stoic idea of like you can't control what happens to you, and like if you die, so be it. And then all the comments were pretty much the same feeling I had, which is like I can't really accept that. Like I can intellectually understand to accept like the feeling of not being able to control the way you die, but like if you told me that I'm gonna die in a month, like I'm not gonna come to terms with that. Like no matter how stoic I am, like there's just no way I'm able to come to terms with that the fact.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, imagine the grieving process for coming to terms with someone else dying. I can't imagine it would be any easier for coming to terms with you dying. I'd imagine that can only be harder the closer the person who's dying gets to you, with, the ultimate maximum of that being you yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just feel like these philosophies are just like much they're so like they feel so good to read because like you feel like you're reading something really profound and that makes you feel good. But to actually like understand what it means and to really internalize it and genuinely believe it, that's like a whole nother like I just don't know how people do that honestly. Like on a real emotional level, like I can't do that.
Well, that's a pretty important distinction, I would say, because this is anecdotal, but I think there are a lot of people who say they agree with a particular school of philosophy, and not to throw a school of thought under the bus, but what I've noticed this most with is nihilism in particular. People will say that they're nihilistic, but they don't actually behave in a way consistent with the ideas of nihilism. I think there's a pretty big distinction between liking an idea and actually believing in the idea. So I think probably what you're seeing a lot on that subreddit are people who like the idea but don't necessarily actually believe it, even if they think they do.
You know, that's a great distinction. Like I think even with nihilism or uh, you know, other philosophies, like most people can talk the talk, but they can't walk the walk.
Exactly, exactly. It's like a religion, actually it's exactly like a religion. People can say that they are, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if they don't actually follow through with the, I'm not sure what the right word is. I don't want to say rules because that just makes it sound authoritarian unnecessarily. But if they don't follow through with the, let's just say, suggested lifestyle, then are they really a member of that religion? And I don't mean you have to follow everything by the book, like be a fundamentalist or orthodox or anything like that. But I'm not sure you could really consider yourself a part of that religion if you don't follow any of its lifestyle suggestions. And it's the same with philosophy. You could claim to agree with all these ideas, but if you don't implement them, then do you actually believe them or do you just appreciate them?
Yep, that's a good point. Like for the religion thing, like if you start to notice someone and like they say they're this particular religion and they're like really faithful in this religion, but like you start to notice like what they do on a daily basis in their life directly contradicts, or like most of the things they do like directly contradicts with their belief, then like yeah, there's something going on there. But
Yeah. Here's an interesting question though. I'm going to base it off of this presumption, which is I think in those cases where someone says like I'm this or that religion, but they don't actually, follow most of the rules of the religion. Like let's just use Christianity because it's the most probably widely understood example. If you claim to be a Christian, but you're always doing things that even you yourself would consider sins, um, maybe that's an oversimplification. But anyways, I think there's a good group of those people, probably most of them, that still believe that they are Christians because of a certain level of just cognitive dissonance about the whole thing. So the question is, if you have that disconnect mentally, like you still believe that you're following it, you still believe that you are this label or that, Christian for this example, but you're not objectively following those behavior parameters, like could you consider yourself still part of it just because that's what your mental belief is, or does it have to align with actual objective reality, assuming such a thing exists?
I mean, that's a really complex question, and I guess like for most people, they would truly believe that they are, even on a, like a subconscious and conscious level, they would truly believe they are following the ideologies of that particular religion, um, just because like their subjective is their objective, right? Isn't that what you told me one time?
Right.
So
Yeah, that's why I said like if such a thing even exists, objective reality. So yeah, I mean it's I don't know. I'm not even sure what my answer to that question would be, because that's the first time I've ever asked it. But yeah, it seems to me that it's probably the person's belief that really makes the most difference, even if it's not consistent with reality. But if that if that contradiction is thrown in their face, then you have to be you have to be willing to accept it at the same time, or possibly reevaluate your life
I mean,
behaviors that you choose to do.
we've seen time and time again when people are presented with things that contradict their beliefs, your mind is people's minds are really good at. I'm just actually just like, it's really incredible how good people's minds are at doing mental gymnastics, for lack of a better word, but like
Sure.
they will do anything to like not believe what they don't want to believe, right? It's like
Yeah,
scientifically proven.
it's a defense mechanism, I think.
Yeah. So
Like rationalization, intellectualization are two defense mechanisms.
yeah, that's why like all the fallacies and biases. Like there's like one really cool thing, I guess now that you have a lot of spare time, Tyler, is just like go through Wikipedia's like list of fallacies and biases, and you
Yeah,
just it's almost infinite, man. It's really insane how much they are.
I've been on that page one time before, and I remember just scrolling and scrolling, like, because I remember I went on the page looking for just a list of cognitive biases, and I wanted to read about every single one, and then I slowly came to the realization that that just wasn't going to happen.
No, man, there's just an incredible amount, which just speaks to like I guess how well, we are pretty flawed. I mean, I guess I would say objectively we're pretty flawed as a human species, and but yet we're able to, still get through it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the idea of people not wanting to admit facts that might contradict their worldview, I think people really cling to this idea of the world that they've constructed in their head. Everybody has their own idea of what the world is really like, and I don't think it's very, very difficult to let go of that idea or even to modify it. If you see facts coming in that contradict the way you think the world operates, it's going to be difficult to accept those, because I believe that that's just the way the brain works. It doesn't want to have to change its entire map of the world.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, as you know, like humans, we hate change, and I think like one of the most important things you can do as a person to really like, I mean, it's fine to have your own belief, but if you're truly like open to your belief and like what it says, then you also have to be open to hearing other people's beliefs. Because if you shut out everyone's thoughts about it, then you're just kind of in a sense like in a bubble sort of, and if you refuse to go out of your own bubble, like it's kind of like fake in a way. Like, do you really truly believe what you're believing, or are you just like afraid of what the outside might tell you? Because the outside might contradict what you believe, and that feels bad.
Yeah. I mean, you know me, I'm a huge free speech guy. So, of course, I think it's super important for people to be open to hearing people that disagree with them, even if it's easy to make an argument to defeat the people that you disagree with. I still think it's important to hear them, because you need to have a way of at least coming up with that argument in the first place, you know?
Absolutely. Like one tip I saw was like if you're a hardcore Democrat, you should like stick to Fox News and like be seriously engaged in what Fox News has to say. And if you're on the other hand, if you're, a hardcore Republican, like watch CNN all day and see how that feels. But be
Yeah,
open to it.
exactly. I do that. My dad and I both do that. And it's kind of funny because sometimes we'll make bets like, how long can we last watching this channel until we just get pissed off and turn it off? I'm not going to say which direction it goes, but yeah, it is really valuable though, even though it's also at the same time annoying and entertaining. Because first of all, I think you need to understand where the other side is coming from, like what their assumptions are. Because I think a lot of disagreements actually aren't over logic at all. It's about the starting point, like the assumptions you start with. Um, you can agree with someone's logic completely, but disagree with their conclusion if you started from different places. I think that's where a lot of political disagreements really originate. Is it comes back to the way people view the world. The way people view the world is essentially their starting point for the opinions they form. And if people fundamentally view the world different ways, it's no wonder why they would formulate different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, to put it simply, like people can agree with each other on the logic, and like, I can follow that logic, but like I disagree about this. Like, where is the disconnect? And the disconnect that you said was like the people's fundamental belief about the world. So like, what are their
Yeah,
morals and what are their values, right?
exactly.
So
It's like take something like Marxism, for example. It's sort of predicated on the belief that the world is, a struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Um, and if you don't view the world that way, you're not going to be able to arrive at the same conclusions that Marx did, even if you agree with his internal logic. It's just not possible. So that
right.
actually makes me wonder whether people can ever truly come to an agreement, um, because I don't think it's possible to make people view the world in similar enough ways that they would reach similar conclusions. I literally don't think it's possible.
I mean, that's a question in of itself. Like, I don't know the answer to that, but it's definitely hard. I mean, just why the political divide is so divisive. Like, there's a reason for that. So,
Yeah. So I want to get back to a question that you asked toward the beginning of this episode that I don't think I've really answered, but I want to get your answer. You asked, what would happen to the world if nobody had any hope? So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about that?
so I think the world will be a much worse place if there was no hope at all. I think that the drive we have in as humans in terms of like motivation and doing stuff is like based on hope, like based on the fact that like things can get better. And I'm gonna botch this story, but in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl noticed that prisoners who, they had this thing where if he saw a prisoner, smoke his last cigarette, he knew like that prisoner was doomed for, because what that represented was like that prisoner just knew that like he just gave up, right? And I guess like smoking your last cigarette is like symbolic of you giving up on your life. And guess what's happened to like the most people, most prisoners who smoked their last cigarette, like a week later they died. Like they just died. And that's obviously an extreme example, but I think it goes to show that like, and those who had hope like persevered and like lived on. And so I think like mentally speaking, like there's something about hope that allows you to strive, like move forward. And I'm sure there's some like neuroscience research on this, but like I think hope can actually like change the way like your brain thinks and like how your body is wired, and like that just affects almost everything you do.
Oh, 100%. Let's The way I think the same sort of idea is in terms of economics in particular. If you take an example of let's take a society where the distribution of resources is essentially like a normal distribution, like a bell curve. Um, Compare that to a society where there's the same amount of total resources, but they're distributed uniformly, as in everybody has the exact same thing. I think that the society where resources are distributed unequally was actually a far healthier society because people have the belief that they can improve. If you have no belief that you can improve your situation, then there really becomes no point of trying anyways. I mean, if everybody's equal, then what's the point of doing anything? So I think it seems like that's the same idea, just put into different terms.
Yeah, I guess like that's one of the things, like you just need a something to strive towards, like you need a goal or purpose or something like that.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm not sure if I've talked about that on the podcast, but we've definitely talked about that in our own conversations, is the importance of having goals and the importance of having something to work toward. And, of course, this isn't something that I just figured out on my own. This is something that a lot of people say, but I really do believe it. I think it's important to have something that gives you the motivation to put some effort into anything, like gives you the motivation to not do nothing. I think people need a reason to not do nothing, because otherwise, why would you do anything? So for me,
Absolutely, yeah.
the importance in life, both on an individual but also a societal level, is having something to strive toward.
I think having a goal bigger than yourself is like if you have that kind of goal, that can probably serve as your purpose. And so I guess personally speaking, like right now in this coronavirus times, like I'm not gonna go into too much detail just for privacy reasons, but the work I do is like directly related to this virus and like, obviously helping the world out in it, to put it simply. And like, even though like working at home would be pretty cool and all that, like it's nice to work from home, but like I get a sense of like a lot of fulfillment by just like going into work, knowing that like the thing I do like made, no matter how marginal of a change, it still made like a net positive to helping out this whole thing, and also like a net positive to the world in general. So that like that's what like motivates me to like, go in every day. It's just like there's something bigger than me that's happening, and I have a responsibility, or duty to like fulfill that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that coronavirus has done along those lines is that it's given a lot of people the opportunity to do that exact thing, to make a contribution that's potentially bigger than themselves or helps the world in some way, just like you're talking about. A lot of people might not have seen how many opportunities there were to do those types of things until a situation like this came up. But now it's pretty much abundantly clear the sorts of things that you can do to help society, because there are a lot of people that need help right now. That's not always on the forefront of our attention a lot of the time. When things are good, we don't focus on the bad, focus on the good. Doesn't mean the bad doesn't exist.
So my next question related to that is like, Tyler, do you think that right now we have a sense of greater, I think a higher sense of gratitude during these times, like, gratitude for, cashiers, for like grocery workers, for all the essential people that need to work right now. Like we have this like feel good attitude towards them, and like, oh yeah, like we should be really nice to them like right now because like they're doing all this like extra work, like they're really important. But as soon as like things go back to normal, do you think like that we will just go back to our old selves again, or do you think like this can truly change society in that way?
I think it does have the potential to truly change people's perceptions. And I'll give you the reason why. It's because when I was a sophomore in college, I was a cashier for pretty much that entire school, and I hated it. I mean, I really couldn't stand it. It was pretty depressing for me. Not to say that that's the worst job in the world or anything like it. It's not the sort of woe is me thing. Obviously, I still had a pretty good life, all things considered. I just didn't like my job. But what it did do for me was it made me treat every single cashier that I ever interacted with afterwards. Not to say that I didn't treat them nicely before, because I certainly did, but I felt much more empathy, much more compassion toward them. And maybe that's just because I was actually in that position, but that effect did last to this day, many years later, not that many years later, but years later. That hasn't really gone away even since I stopped being a cashier. So I think there is the potential for people's perceptions to change permanently, or at least decently long term. Maybe not permanently, but I don't think it'll go back to the way it was immediately, at least.
Okay,
Maybe.
yeah, I can get on board with people changing their perceptions long term, and I'll say that like your example of working as a cashier is like that's the probably the best thing, because like that's like direct first-hand experience. But still, for a lot of people right now, it's just like still only second-hand experience of like witnessing them working. And there's still just a huge difference between like first-hand working and like watching someone work. And to be able
Yeah,
to actually like viscerally be them is just way different, right? But
yeah, it is different, and that's why I'm saying maybe it was just because I was actually in the position rather than being on the other side of that counter. But the fact that it's lasted until now is what gives me a little bit of confidence that maybe people's perceptions will, if they have changed already, will remain changed. If they haven't changed at this point, I'm not saying that they're going to change in some profound way. And I'm not saying people's opinions necessarily have to change either, but I think there's a good chance that this changes the way a lot of people look at the world in general, pretty much permanently, or almost.
Hmm. And on the topic of caring, I wanted to kind of shift this conversation to this. I jotted this down because I thought it was pretty interesting. But the concept of like death tolls and like how we sort of perceive them and how we internalize death tolls and like do we actually like have an emotion to death tolls in general? So my general thought is that like over time or like the greater the number, like the death tolls just become like pretty much just a number. And you see this with like school shootings or mass shootings before, not just coronavirus, but numbers become just a number. Like you don't really have like a, I mean, you feel sad for them, but do you like there's a world of difference between like feeling sad that you're like I don't know, like your grandmother died because of the virus, or for like 1,000 people like in China or any country, not just China, dying. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it all comes down to the presentation. A number is just that, it's a number, but a visual representation of that number can be very powerful. I think a good example would be something like the Holocaust Museum. Compare going to the Holocaust Museum, I don't know if you've ever been there, but compared just it, you can imagine what it's like as a very powerful experience for most people that go, compared to reading a few chapters in a textbook about the Holocaust. No pictures or anything, just statistics about what happened, very matter of fact. You're you're learning the same fundamental thing, but the presentation of it makes a massive difference in how it affects you essentially. So yeah, I think looking at death toll numbers is pretty much meaningless and will remain meaningless. But seeing footage, looking at actual people, hospitals, things like that, that can make a difference. And I think it's you can read that 1 million people died and it won't affect you, but seeing one person die can affect you greatly.
Oh, absolutely, man. Like it goes back to, I mean, yeah, like experience is the best teacher, even if it's not firsthand experience. Just like watching, like for coronavirus, like I watched a video of this guy was in Spain, I think, and he filmed this hospital getting overwhelmed with patients, and there was just like some people that had to like lie on the floor. There was like designated spaces on the floor because they didn't have enough bed units, and so you see with the people in the bed, like pretty much just they looked like they were suffering because it was like hard to breathe for them. And once you have that kind of knowledge rather than like statistics, that just shifts your perception of the whole thing entirely.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think there's nothing that can really replace that true firsthand experience. And I think that's partly what contributes to that feeling of invincibility that younger people, as we have seen, have. The people who are still going to the beach, still going on vacations and such. It's because I think it's partly because when you're at that age, you just haven't seen the things that could happen. And I'm not saying I'm completely out of that mentality because, like I mentioned earlier, in a lot of ways, I still do have that mentality. But I think one of the things that contributes to it pretty strongly is the fact that you haven't had that truly affective experience. You've only had potentially, emotionally removed experiences or interpretations of what's going on. Like maybe a more concrete way to put it would be the people who have witnessed something like, let's just say AIDS, for example, probably react on a more emotional level to something like this than those who never lived through anything like that before.
Yeah, I mean, the experience, right? It's just a world difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's really anything you can do to make that any different for the people who haven't had the experience, though. I think it's just one of those things that's doomed to be the way it is.
Yeah, it's hard to like shove a video to a person's face and be like, watch this, and like have empathy for them.
Yeah, and what's the point anyways? I mean, what's that really going to accomplish?
Right, if it's not their own desire to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, something I've done in watching the news recently and, looking at all those people who still went to beaches and on vacations and stuff is just accept the nature of human stupidity sometimes and understand that there's probably nothing you can do to ever change that because it's who we are.
Isn't that like a, I don't think it's like a true law, but there's like this Wikipedia, it's like on Wikipedia, but it's like don't attribute malice when you can attribute like stupidity. I think that was like
Hanlon's
something like
razor.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's I think it's yeah, never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence.
There it is. Yeah,
Yeah, I actually really like that quite a bit. I use that razor much more often than Occam's razor.
yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's definitely true. I mean, look at politics, for example. I mean, by that I mean political debates. Look at how quickly people will violate that by saying, if you, and they won't literally say it this way, but essentially what they do is say, if you disagree with me, you're a bad person in this way, like racist, for example.
Oh
It's a
yeah,
complete violation of that razor.
that's when you have a that example of having political debate and someone calling you racist, you have to jump through quite a lot of hurdles to get from A to B. It's not from A to B, it's actually A to Z, and you're skipping all the letters.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Um, One thing about the death toll thing is like kind of this idea of conceptualizing numbers and how humans are just really bad at, anything over really like 100 or 1,000. Like we actually have like a really hard time understanding what that means. So like when you say like 1 million people died and like someone else tells me 1 billion people died, like those are two enormous like a billion is, I mean, you can just do your own math on that, but like to me in my head, to what it feels like the same thing, honestly, like despite how big of
Yeah.
a difference it is, which is like really I think I researched this and it's called scope insensitivity, which is
Yep.
I'll read a quote on this because I thought it was pretty cool, but I'm not very good at feeling the size of large numbers. Once you start tossing around numbers larger than 1,000 or maybe even 100, the numbers just seem big. Consider Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. If you told me that Sirius is as big as 1 million Earths, I would feel like that's a lot of Earths. If instead you told me that you could fit 1 billion Earths inside Sirius, I would still just feel like that's a lot of Earths. The feelings are almost identical. In context, my brain grudgingly admits that 1 billion is a lot larger than 1 million and puts forth a token effort to feel like 1 billion Earth-sized star is bigger than 1 million Earth-sized star. But out of context, if I wasn't anchored at 1 million when I heard 1 billion, both these numbers just feel vaguely large.
Yeah, exactly. Something similar that I heard at one point before, I don't know if this is 100% true, but it's something that I had heard is that in a similar sense, the smallest probability that humans can really conceptualize is 1 in 1,000. So, like, if you ask someone what are the odds of winning the lottery, maybe they'll give you the mathematical answer, but what they really conceptualize in their head is just 1 out of 1,000, which actually explains why so many people do things like playing the lottery.
But I think you told me that before. It's just like people think they have a greater chance of winning because they can't conceptualize like greater than 1,000, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like if you tell someone you have 1 in 1 million, it's exactly the inverse of what you were just talking about. If you tell someone they have 1 in 1 million odds and then 1 in 1 billion odds, do you really conceptualize that any differently?
Nope.
Probably
Yeah.
not.
I
So
think another thing with numbers is like this is a quote by Albert Allen Barrett. He was a professor of physics who studied population growth, but he said that the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. It's like
that's a
really
good
cool
quote.
quote.
I never heard that before.
But it's like people, they I mean, this still astounds me, but there's this like really fun fact that if you fold a paper like I don't know how many times it was, but it's like maybe 12 times, and you can like when you fold it 12 times, you can actually get that's like the distance from the Earth to the moon, and just like people, myself included, obviously, but just have a hard time understanding what like the concept of not understanding the concept, but really just like really internalizing what exponential growth means. So like when you, I guess related
Yeah,
to coronavirus, like I guess people are kind of like shocked when like it's every day, and yeah.
I remember I used to play RuneScape when I was a kid, and I remember this banner ad. I don't even know why I remember this. This is such a random memory, but there was this banner ad on the website one time, or maybe more than one time if I remember it, that it was one of those like stupid sort of clickbait things from back before clickbait was that real of a thing. Um, but it was the question, if you could get, this many dollars every day for a month, or you could get 1 cent on the first day and then have it double every
Mhm.
day, like which one would you take? And it's one of those things where the answer appears to obviously be you get, I don't know, $1,000 every day of the month or something, but it's not even close if you actually do the math. People just
Oh
don't.
yeah.
I think the way you said it before was fine. People just don't really understand the concept of exponential growth. We're just not wired that way.
Yeah, that's I mean I don't I think I would disagree on the greatest that is the greatest shortcoming of the human race. That might be an overstatement, but it's definitely like one of those things that like yeah, we just can't understand it, and I mean that's fine.
Yeah. The greatest shortcoming is probably more like 5 fingers. If we had 6 fingers, imagine how much more stuff we could do.
6 fingers. I never thought about
We
that.
have a
What can
base
we do with
12
6 fingers?
numeric system.
Oh wow.
Pretty revolutionary.
Revolution.
When we start genetically engineering ourselves, that's going to be the first thing that we do. Give ourselves 6 fingers.
Make it 7, make it 8.
You know the reason Homer Simpson's so dumb? 4 fingers.
Oh, does he actually have 4 fingers?
Yeah, everyone in The Simpsons has 4 fingers, actually. Or I
Oh, I
think
never
almost all
noticed.
of them, maybe not all of them. Yeah, that's why it's such a wacky universe. We would actually be exactly like that if we also had 4 fingers. The Simpsons is just a like a realistic science fiction show.
I read once that our pinky toe like actually serves no purpose, and like we would be like fine without it. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's I heard that somewhere.
I mean, I could see it being true.
Yeah.
It's definitely the least important, um, I don't know,
Body
index.
part, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's wrap this up in a few sentences. What do you think, if any, are the sort of takeaways from this pandemic as a whole?
I think this coronavirus pandemic as a whole, um, you know, as I said before, like the greatest thing humans are able to do is like the ability to adapt to their situation. So like you really take what this situation gives you and utilize it to your best ability. So whether that be learning new things, being more compassionate to others, learning gratitude, volunteering in your however way you feel like volunteering, or simply put, like making a positive impact to the growth. Positive impact to the world. Which sounds really cliche. Like everyone wants to make a positive impact, but like actually like do the things you've been saying you've been wanting to do, and just like go and do them, and that's that's pretty much how I would say it.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I think the main takeaway for me is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that this is really an opportunity for people's philosophies to be tested. It's basically a stress test of the way people approach their own lives. So I would take that as a pretty great opportunity. And then also the opportunity, maybe this doesn't go for everybody, but it definitely goes for me, is this is a chance to do a lot of those things that were just being put off for no real reason before, like things that I wanted to read, things that I wanted to write, all that sort of stuff. I think that's for me the primary silver lining, but definitely the more universal one is test the way that you actually view life. See if you genuinely believe what you think you believe. Because if you behave differently just because this is going on, then you probably don't understand what your beliefs really are.
Yeah, great time for growth and understanding, and there's no excuse now, guys. There's no excuse.
Absolutely. So this has been Collective Conscious, episode 10. I've been with my friend Junwei. I am Tyler. Thanks, guys.